grandmother's china doll. My sister Katie and I had a bit of a rivalry growing up. She knew I absolutely hated dolls. So sometime in the middle of the night, she snuck into my room and planted an old china doll that our grandmother had given her before she died. I would wake up and see the doll sitting on my dresser as it stared straight at me, and it would give me a small panic attack. I never even touched the thing. The thought of handling that creepy mockery of a human girl sent chills up and down my spine. So I would leave for the morning with it still sitting on my dresser, and when I got back, Katie had it moved. Now, I was never a mean-spirited girl. I enjoyed my sister's playful prank. It was true that dolls absolutely freaked me out, but I never let anyone know how badly they bothered me. I kept exactly how scared my irrational fear made me a secret. I was never smart enough to get her back with any of my own practical jokes. My brain just didn't work that way. So I would just deal with the morning after morning of having a near-fatal heart attack. Then the day came when my sister was moving out of our house into her own apartment, and I rode with her to help her unpack. As we went through box after box removing their contents, I noticed something. "Katie, where's the china doll Grandma gave you?" She looked up at me from the box she was unpacking. "Oh, I'm not taking it since you wanted it so badly. I just left it at home in your room." I hesitated for a moment, confused by her words, and then I laughed when I realized she must be joking. "Katie, I hate dolls, especially that one. They give me the creeps." This time Katie looked puzzled. "Then why did you move it into your room every night?" Her words unsettled me, and I became very uneasy. "Katie, I didn't. You did try to scare me." "Amanda, stop messing around. You're going to make me angry. I know you always resented that Grandma gave me that doll, so it's now yours. I don't want to hear anything more about it." Her face became hard, and her voice became angry. I stood there, mouth agape and bewildered. Was she being serious? Or was this just part of some elaborate joke? Her face softened. "Look, I'm sorry. I got a bit angry over nothing. Let's just finish and we'll order a pizza and have a sister's night. You're still staying, aren't you?" I nodded, deciding not to argue with her. We finished getting everything settled in her new home. Then Katie and I began watching movies, while we waited for the food to arrive. When we were done eating, we were both beat from a long day of moving, so we turned in early. I made my bed on the couch while Katie slept down the hall in her own bedroom. I briefly thought over what Katie said about the doll, and I wondered why exactly she lied about moving into my room at night. Exhaustion overtook me quickly, however, and soon I was fast asleep. The next morning, I awoke to a low and rhythmic banging sound. Rubbing sleep from my eyes, I sat up and looked toward the front door. It stood open, and the wind was blowing it against my shoes that I had taken off and placed on the mat in front of her door. There were brown and red leaves blowing in from outside, and my gaze followed them all the way to the coffee table that sat inches from the couch. And I screamed. Sitting on the coffee table, staring directly at me, was my grandmother's china doll. No one should ever be afraid of clowns. I think it is so silly when I hear people say that they are afraid of clowns. You see, I happen to be a clown, and I take my job very seriously. I am a professional through and through, and I find it awfully insulting when people say that clowns are scary. It shouldn't bother me, I suppose. I still get plenty of work no matter what nonsense is thrown around about evil killer clowns. I do children's birthday parties, bar mitzvahs, and I go in to cheer up sick kids in the hospital on occasion. I was even once called and asked if I would go in to one of our local schools and entertain children there for a little end-of-the-year celebration. The grade schoolers were invited to the gymnasium. It is this particular job that I want to tell you about. The call came Monday morning that week, and when I answered it, it was the principal of the school at the other end. The principal was a pleasant chap by the name of Mr. Lewis. He explained that he would like me to set up a booth in the gym. He asked if I could make balloon animals and tell jokes, or even do some of that face painting that made you look like a tiger or a lizard. I told him that indeed I did all of those things, and I would be delighted to come to the school. Mr. Lewis then asked me for my going rate, which I gave him, although it was a little higher due to the cost of the supplies I would need, and he said it wouldn't be a problem. I wrote down the date and time he gave me, and a couple weeks later I found myself in the gymnasium of the school. I set my booth early. I am a professional, like I said, so for a few hours I stood waiting as other booths of raffle ticket sellers and food vendors took their turn setting up. I'd already prepared a great deal of assorted balloon animals, as I had anticipated giving out a lot of them, because they were always a favorite among the children, when a woman approached my booth. "Nice balloons. Very lovely work," she remarked. I jumped just a little bit, having been focused on my task. I looked up to see the most gorgeous woman I had ever laid eyes on. She had long, fiery red hair that seemed to warm my insides. Her complexion was a fair snow white, and her emerald green eyes stared into mine, making me blush. Although with my makeup on, I doubt she noticed. Oh, thank you." I fumbled over the words like an idiot, and once more I spoke them much louder than I meant to. The woman laughed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to startle you," as she offered her right hand to mine. "Kelly Martin, I'm a teacher here." "Jeff Millis, frightened clown," I said, and that made her laugh again. Her laugh was like music to my ears. "It's usually the clowns that scare other people," she said through a giggle. I pulled down a giraffe from my wall of balloon animals and handed it to her. "That's a horrible stereotype," I said, smiling. She returned my smile and took the animal from me. "Giraffes are my favorite. How did you know?" she asked. "I'm a professional, ma'am," I told her. "It's my job to know these things." She smiled and said thank you, saying that she had to go check in on other booths, but that she would be sure to put the balloon in her car for keeping. I told her she was very welcome and said that I hoped to see her around. Soon after meeting Kelly Martin, it was time for all the children to start filing in with their parents, going from booth to booth, saying what everyone had to offer. I stayed pretty busy that night because, as expected, the children almost wanted nothing from me but balloon animals, so I ran out pretty quick. Most of the night for me was spent blowing up balloons and taking requests from children. Anything they wanted, of course, because, as I said, I'm a professional. At one point, I even had to run back to the van for more supplies. The whole time I was working in the booth, I was keeping a lookout for Kelly, but I never saw her. Kids came and went that night, but there was no sign of that red-headed angel, which was a shame. When it was time for the booths to pack up, I was giving out my last balloon animal to a little girl in pigtails. I was approached shortly thereafter by Mr. Lewis, who asked if I had seen Miss Martin, and I told him I hadn't. He said that she was supposed to be chaperoning that night with him, but he couldn't find her anywhere, even though her car was still in the parking lot. I told him I'd keep an eye out for her. He thanked me and walked off. I spent the entire drive home in my van thinking about that woman. I parked my van outside of my driveway, and I turned the ignition off. I stood up and walked to the back of the vehicle. I parked my van outside of my driveway and turned the ignition off. I stood up and walked to the back of the vehicle, where I kept most of my supplies, and knelt down to pull up the tarp I had covering all my things. Miss Martin laid there. Her wrists and legs were bound by zip ties. She looked up at me with her pleading emerald green eyes, and I couldn't help but smile. The sleeping gas I had put in the giraffe must have worn off some time ago, but I knew she wouldn't fully awake until at least we arrived at home. Like I said, I'm a professional. I was delighted to find that I didn't poke too small of a hole in it, or enough of the gas wouldn't have come out for her lungs to inhale when she went out to smoke in her car, as I knew she would. Oh, how she tried to scream through her gag when she saw the pictures plastered all over the walls of the roof of my van. Pictures of her and her husband that I had been taking for several months now from the comfort of my own home, right next door. "You and I are going to have such a wonderful time tonight," I tell her, pulling a small chisel and placing the point on her kneecap and reaching for my hammer. "My goodness," she screamed. It became such an issue I had to remove her tongue next out of fear that someone might hear us. I know what you were thinking, my dear friends. Don't worry, I removed all my makeup before leaving the school, because, as I have said before, I myself am a completely different story, but no one should ever be afraid of clowns. The Well in My Yard. When I was little, we had a well that sat about 20 feet from the side of my house. We lived out in the country where the city water didn't run, so the well was our means for running water in the home. The well was capped off by a great cement slab that prevented anyone or anything from falling in. I spent so many days playing near that well. I would stand on top of the slab and bow as if I were a magician at a show, or have an epic imaginary sword fights with goblins who tried to take my great stone monument for themselves. I would play for hours and hours near that well, despite my parents' warning about what could happen. I was admittedly pretty stupid. One day I found myself fighting a new group of evil goblins who had invaded the kingdom of my front yard. When I stepped back on the cement slab to defend my monument, once again, the stone cracked. At first I didn't even know what was happening, and then falling through the darkness of the well. I fell a long way, but I fell fast, and before a second even passed, I splashed down into the dark water that filled the well. I choked and gagged as I frantically splashed, trying to tread water and keep my head above the surface. I was an only child, and I was so frightened. I thought for sure in that moment that I would drown there in that darkness. But finally, I regained some composure, and I put my hands on the cold stone wall. I began kicking my feet, and I was able to keep my head above the water with the support that my hands on the wall gave me. As soon as I caught my breath, I began screaming for help. I knew my dad was working in the garage, and my mom was inside the house, so the likelihood of my parents hearing me was very slim. I screamed, and I screamed, and I screamed, but no one came. The well must have been too deep for anyone to hear me. I gave one final scream as loud as I could, and I looked up to the sunlight that was spilling in from the opening of the well. The dark water was cold, and I began shivering and thinking that if I didn't get out of here soon, the cold would force my legs to stop moving. And then what? Through the opening of the well I could make out nothing but the blue sky. I was about to call out again, but a voice behind me cut me off. Finally, someone to play with. I froze in place, staring straight ahead at the gray stone wall of the well, refusing to turn my head and see the source of the voice. A moment passed, and the voice spoke again. I have been watching you for so long, unable to leave this awful prison. The voice came out as a low, hissing gurgle, as if whoever was speaking had a mouth that was partially submerged in water. But now, you're here, and I won't be alone anymore. The hissing gurgle echoed and bounced off the gray walls of the well, making it seem as if the voice was coming from all around. After several moments of silence passed, I somehow found the courage to turn my neck slowly to the left and look behind my shoulder, my eyes straining in the dark of the well and scanning the walls. What I saw was terrifying, but it was only terrifying because I saw nothing at all. I then snapped my head to the right, and once again there was nothing. When a couple more moments went by, I finally felt brave enough to speak. "Where are you?" I called out. There were 2 or 3 dreadful long moments of silence, but then the gurgling spoke once again. "I'm right here," the voice whispered in my left ear, and I screamed as a hand wrapped around my leg and pulled me under the water. I coughed, I gagged, I called for help as my head was repeatedly pulled under the water, and then back to the surface again when I fought against whatever was dragging me under. I kicked my free leg out in the dark water to hit whatever was pulling me, but I couldn't find my mark. It was as if there was no one there at all in the well with me. I kicked and screamed and struggled with all my might. The cold water made me weak. Try as I might, I couldn't fight the exhaustion, and I was pulled under. As the cold water entered my lungs, I started to close my eyes, and soon I began to lose consciousness. Then a miracle happened. All at once the hand let go, and I heard a muffled voice calling out. My eyes shot open. I saw someone standing at the opening of the well, and hope swelled within me as I kicked my feet hard until I reached the surface. As soon as my head broke water, I could hear my father calling out over the coughing and sputtering. "Jimmy!" my father called down. "Grab the rope, son. I'll pull you up." My hands shot out, stretching for the rope, and as soon as they found it, my father's strong hands went to work pulling me out of the well. Once I was out, my father scooped me up in his arms and ran into the house to run a hot shower while he hollered for my mom to get some towels. After I was warmed up and put into bed, Mom brought me warm chicken soup, and soon after I was asleep, due to pure exhaustion. The next day my father scolded me severely for my stunt, but he didn't spank me or ground me. I guess he knew I had learned my lesson, and I did. On top of the horrific experience, I had a wicked cold for about a week after the incident. The next day my father went to work as quickly as he could to board up the well, and then he erected a small wire fence around it to be safe. He really didn't have to go through all that trouble. I never said anything to either of my parents about the voice in the well, but I never forgot it. That was enough to keep me far away from the well, even well into my teenage years. It's been about 6 years since my fall into the dark water, and now I have a 4-year-old brother. Just yesterday, I was watching over him while my father was at work, and my mom was at the grocery store. I was reading a book while sitting on an easy chair, and my brother was on the living room floor playing with his toys, and talking to himself as he did. Then all of a sudden I noticed the room was silent. I lifted my head from my book and saw my brother standing at the tall living room window, with one hand on the sill, and the other waving out at something beyond the glass. I looked outside, expecting to see my mother had come home, and my brother had noticed her out in the yard, but all that lay beyond the window was a small fence around a boarded-up well.
Bye bye.